Hello again. I'm Braddock Supervisor John Cook. Welcome back to Braddock Neighborhood News, the program I am using to provide you with information on issues facing our community and ideas on how we can strengthen our neighborhoods. This month, I'm honored to welcome our Fairfax County Executive, Tony Griffin, to share some memories from his 23 years of dedicated service to the citizens of Fairfax County, the past 12 as County Executive. Mr. Griffin will be retiring effective April of 2012. I want to personally take this opportunity to thank him for all he has done to make Fairfax County the great place it is to work, play, and raise a family. Tony, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for having me, John.
It's unfortunate that I waited to the end of your term to get you on here, but we'll make up for it. And again, thank you so much for everything you've done for the county, certainly for the board, for me. I've learned a lot from your service. And, it's interesting. I don't think the people of Fairfax County know a lot about how our government's structured. They certainly don't know how much you do to keep the county running on a day-to-day basis. So why don't we start with just explaining a little bit about what the job of county executive involves in Fairfax County.
Well, essentially, under Virginia law and under the urban county executive form of government, I'm the chief executive officer for the county. That's to be distinguished from the chief elected officer. And I'm charged with running the government on a day-to-day basis. I have the ability to make appointments. Under our system, I do bring senior positions, department head level positions to the board for confirmation. But I'm responsible for the personnel end of making sure that the government works, processing all the financials. I'm essentially where the fiduciary responsibility lies for the county. I'm charged with presenting a budget to the board for its consideration on an annual basis. And of course, I have to make sure that we operate such that we finish each year with a balanced budget. In other words, we finish in the black, not in the red.
That was a good analogy of being the CEO for those folks involved in business. That's really kind of how our county is structured. Our Board of Supervisors is somewhat analogous to the Board of Directors of a corporation. It's a part-time board, a theoretically part-time chairman of the board. We make policy, we pass laws, but you're the one who runs the government. And actually that has worked out to be a pretty good system.
Our system in Virginia and in Fairfax is essentially what's referred to as the council manager form of government. And the Board of Supervisors, in essence the council, is the board of directors. They set policy. And then the responsibility of the county executive is to execute that policy and make sure that we're doing what we should be doing on a day-to-day basis, meet the expectations of the community.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your background. You've been with the county for quite some time, but where'd you come from and how'd you get here?
Well, I essentially am a local boy. I was born in the District of Columbia. My parents were living in Arlington at the time, and before I turned one, they moved to what was then the town of Falls Church, which was part of Fairfax County. Falls Church, and within a year or so, became a city. The first school I went to is a school that was out, I'm thinking of where the district lines are, but it's either in your district or very close to it. It was called the Benjamin Acres Day School, and it was at the intersection of Guinea Road and 236. It's where the Jewish Community Center is presently.
Yeah.
And I went there for first and second grade. We did live in Connecticut for 5 years. My father worked for the Veterans Administration, but transferred back to this area when I was 12. And I lived on 31st Street in Arlington, which was the last street before you went into Fairfax County. I've belonged to St. Dunstan's Episcopal Church for, I think, 53 years now, which is in McLean. And so I have local roots. I graduated from Yorktown High School in Arlington, but I've been in the Arlington, Falls Church, Fairfax area essentially all my life, but for 5 years.
Those are your years in the Marine Corps.
Well, no, the 5 years that I was in Connecticut
Okay.
between the ages of 7 and 12. I went to a small liberal arts school in upstate New York in the Finger Lakes region, Hobart College. And when I graduated in '68, Uncle Sam was very interested in my availability. This was pre-lottery. This was the original draft. And after investigating what options I had, I enlisted in the Marine Corps and went to officer candidate school. Was commissioned in December of '68 and went through several Marine Corps schools, went through Army Artillery School, and then deployed to Vietnam for a year in '69 and '70. I was offered a regular commission in the Marine Corps, but opted not to accept it. Went into reserve status in '71. And at that time, it was a question of, okay, now what do I do? And was very interested in government, very interested in politics. Based on my experience as a lieutenant, thought I enjoyed the responsibility of being in charge. And all of that suggested that maybe a career in local government might be a good move. I interviewed with a number of managers in Northern Virginia to get a sense of whether this really was a good fit for me or not, and concluded that it was. All of the folks that I consulted with suggested that I go back to school and get my master's degree. Even back in the early '70s, the master's degree was becoming sort of a union card, if you will, in terms of making progress in the profession. So I went to Virginia Tech on the GI Bill and got a master's in urban affairs. There was no public administration degree in Virginia at that time. That was the closest thing to it. And then following upon that degree, I got a Master of Urban and Regional Planning. The focus being that management and land use. If you take a look at our agenda,
it pretty much covers it.
in the morning, it tends to be financial and personnel related items, and in the afternoon, it's land use. And so my preparation was to get that academic training, which I did. I had to do an internship for my second master's degree and reached out to Arlington, which was my home address at the time, and was offered an internship in the summer of '75, and that then translated into a permanent position in the county manager's office. And 6 years later, I was acting county manager. I won't get into the details of that, but it was a very interesting experience. I did that for 13 months and then became the first deputy manager for Arlington following that. My title preceding my acting was administrative assistant, which is not a title that's used today. And I think that was recognized in giving me the new title of deputy manager. I then applied for and accepted the position of city manager in Falls Church, and I did that for 6 years. And so in 1989, I had the opportunity to come to Fairfax as deputy county executive for planning and development. Public safety was subsequently added to that as well. And that's essentially how I got here. I did an acting stint as acting county executive in '96 and '97, and then was offered the position in actually December of '99, officially appointed January 2000. And
in the last in the last 20 years or so that you've been talking about in Fairfax County, there's been a lot of change, and also part of that kind of roller coaster we've talked about, tough times in the early '90s, and then a period of growth, and I don't know if easier times is the right term, and then a lot of growth over the last decade, and then some very tough years here toward the end. Kind of what's your overall assessment? How do you think the county's done over the last 20 years? What are the thematic changes you've seen?
Well, I think there are probably two changes that I would emphasize. Certainly the financial end has made things a little bit more interesting. My impression in coming to Fairfax in '89 was that to the extent that the staff was undertaking new programs at the direction of the board, the solution by and large was to ask for more staff and more money, and it generally was available. The '80s was a period of time for significant growth, not just in terms of the county population, but also in terms of the organization. The '90s, I think, was a good wake-up call for the organization. It's a little tougher to manage when times are tight. When there's lots of money, management should be challenging, but is less challenging just because the money is there. And so the '90s, I thought, was a very valuable lesson for the organization. It made managers think about what they were doing and how they could do it better and more efficiently. And I thought it was an appropriate exercise. It was a healthy exercise to go through that. We went through it again subsequently, about 4 years later, primarily because we had deferred some spending issues, and they sort of caught up with us 4 years later, and we went through that exercise yet again. More painful, probably less of a learning exercise, but a valuable one. And so we've learned to live within our means, and that's a very important lesson, and I think we've executed that well the last 4 or 5 years. The other significant change, I think, in terms of how we're governed and how we're structured is that the county essentially followed what I would call the industrial model of management, which was prevalent around World War II and after World War II, and it was a very top-down kind of emphasis and very siloed. Departments didn't really talk or collaborate a lot with each other, and problems back then often could be solved with a simpler solution. And so you could have a problem and say give it to the Department of Public Works, and the Public Works Department would solve the problem. But the problems we have today are often much more complex and much more integrated in terms of what the solutions required. So we have a much more collaborative organization and culture today than we had 20 years ago. And I encourage a lot of what I'll call cross-cutting kinds of conversations and collaboration. And in the old days, you kind of needed permission to sort of go across ways, and today you don't. Today the issue is, if it's appropriate to consult with your fellow colleagues and other organizations, you need to do it. You don't need permission. You should do it, and that's to be encouraged. And so communication and collaboration is more from the bottom up and more sideways and less top down. Now, obviously, you have to have a top down in terms of the implementation of the board's directives, but that's to provide the overall guidance and the parameters, but then encourage the organization to figure out how to solve those problems.
You know, it's an interesting point, because certainly in the time that I've been on the board and the time active civically before that, really learned that Fairfax County especially, we really do have an approach of involving a lot of people in a lot of different ways to get something done, not only between agencies in the county government, but public-private, bringing in faith communities, working with, it might be state and local, and it seems like any time that there's a relatively large issue, there's a number of people in the room from different places, and that's really, I think, one of the hallmarks of how we do business here.
And an appropriate way, and in some ways it models what you do within your own district. You have a lot of community forums, you encourage volunteers, you encourage people to be engaged, and essentially you're doing that on a community basis, and I'm trying to do it on an organizational basis. Nobody has the corner on the market in terms of intelligence or the solution, but collaboratively we often can come up with solutions. And we need to do that not just within departments, but across departments. A good example might be dealing with the environment. At one time, the Environmental Advisory Commission, EQAC, was recommending that the county have the equivalent of an environmental protection agency as a department. And I resisted that. And quite frankly, it was, it's a resource kind of issue. But the answer in the way we're handling it is we have an environmental coordinating committee. Any agency that has something to do with the environment is represented on this committee. And the essence is similar to what I was talking about earlier. It's the collaboration of that expertise, whether it's the hazardous materials folks from the fire department or public works dealing with stormwater. They all have a piece of the environment. So what we've tried to do with the committee is harness that expertise across all those agencies that have something to do with the environment, and then collaboratively they tackle the issues of the environment. But that expertise also remains in the agency to deal with the issues that they were put in place to deal with in the first place.
That's an interesting aspect of the environmental issues, because not too long ago, we, the general population, not just Fairfax, but kind of had the view of, you could either build or you could be environmental. You either had economic growth or environmental protection. You had to sort of choose. And certainly I think the Tyson's Corner Task Force plan was a great example of how you don't have to choose. You can marry the two and have now growth with environmental protection. We do a good job of that in Fairfax, I think. I think we're really on the cutting edge of that idea that environmental protection is an aspect of what we do when we do general things, and it shouldn't be a choice between something or the environment. You really can and should do both together.
I think if we work collaborative, we can figure out how we can do the whole thing rather than pieces. And the issue is bringing that expertise together and integrating that expertise.
We're going to sort of try to mirror that in Braddock District. We're going to be putting together a citizen land use committee next year, which is something some of the other districts have. We haven't had as much land use in Braddock recently, but now we're getting more, in part because of redistricting, in part because of infill and renovation development. But I'd like to see our land use committee be a land use and environmental management committee. We have a lot of stormwater issues in Braddock, as in other places. And instead of having two different groups, one looks at only development and one looks only at environment, to have the two at the same place, in the same room at the same table, so that we can marry those issues together, I think will mirror what we're doing in the county.
That sounds like the thing to do. You get that collaboration rather than the conflict that comes later if they're not talking to each other.
Right. So what, over the course of 23 years, and especially the last dozen as county executives, we've talked about the budget and how it goes up and down. What have been sort of the big events or big issues that you've either seen or been a part of during your service here in Fairfax?
Well, you mentioned one just a moment ago in terms of Tyson's. That's a major replanning effort. The board at this time, of course, has adopted a plan, and we're trying to figure out how to make that plan work. We currently have 15 applications in, and it's challenging to try to address those applications appropriately and do it in a timely fashion. Development community, time is money, and they're very concerned about how that works. Associated with Tyson's and probably the catalyst for looking at the Tyson's plan was Rail to Dulles. And that's something that I've been working on since 1999, and we're getting close to the finish line in terms of whether we're in or we're out in terms of phase 2. That decision will probably be made in April. But that's been a long haul in terms of the possibilities of doing it, how might it work, okay, what's it going to look like, how are we going to pay for it, all been major issues, and there have been times when the train went off the tracks a few times, and it's on the track now. As you know, the board just signed off on how we're going to make the financing work. We're still waiting to see what the final costs are going to be, and based on the preliminary engineering. But that's been a major effort. Dealing with the aftermath of 9/11 and dealing with the security issues, and it hasn't just been in terms of sort of threats to national security. It's also been sort of what I'll call an all threats approach, which includes weather events. We've had
a few of them recently, haven't we?
Well, we had Isabel, which had a major impact, and of course you're referencing the Tropical Storm Lee that came through,
and the snow a couple years ago.
And the snow. It just seems like there have been a lot of issues that, quite frankly, I can't recall occurring in the previous 10 years. Prior to my becoming county executive, we had a two-person shop related to a sort of emergency management, and their primary focus was when it snowed and how much snow, and calling me to find out if we were going to close the county or be open. Now it's a very sophisticated operation. It's not a large operation. I think it's only 12 people now compared to 2. It's significant growth if you're looking at the numbers on a percentage basis, but in the context of the size of the county and the issues we've dealt with. But we have a fully functioning emergency operations center, which we really didn't have before. We had 2 rooms in an old schoolhouse. That was our emergency management center until just a few years ago. Now it's a very sophisticated center. So I've seen, just a lot of different issues over time. The budget probably, and dealing with that on an annual basis is probably the leader, but there have been an opportunity to do a lot of different projects over time that have been a benefit to the community, and it's been fun to see that happen.
And so what are the things that are on the horizon for us, for your successor and for the board in the next 5 to 10 years? What do you see being the large issues that we need to grapple with?
Well, I think budget's going to continue to be a major issue. I'm not an economist, and I won't claim a lot of expertise, but I've been fairly successful in projecting out 2 or 3 years, and I think the kind of budget we've dealt with for the current year and what I'm forecasting for next year will probably be the circumstance for the county for the next 3 or 4 years past that. We're at the point where the housing market's stabilized, but there isn't any real growth in our revenue, and as a consequence, I think the biggest challenge for the board is going to be managing expectations. Our community has very high expectations, understandably so, because we've been able, by and large, to deliver on those expectations. But that's getting harder, and harder in the sense of being able to live within the resources that are available, but still do all the things that people expect. We have a great quality of life. We have great school system. But it takes money to maintain that, and we're still growing as a community. Our population's continuing to increase. Schools are expecting 4,000 more students next year. So, our ability to manage that growth and meet the expectations of the community, I think, is the #1 issue. Organizationally, I think the board's going to be challenged in terms of what's the new paradigm going to be for employment. I'm concerned that I think the public model for compensation, both the salary piece but also the other pieces that go with it, isn't working very well now. When you have pay freezes for an extended period of time, when you have step systems but steps don't happen, is that model a model that's going to work in the future? In some respects, thankfully, I'm not going to have to deal with that. But that's, I think, going to be a major challenge in terms of the board.
We've got just maybe about 15 seconds. One piece of advice to give to your successor, what would it be?
Stay in the background, do the hard work, but pay attention to the board and let them get the credit.
The last part sounds really good. And Tony, I want to thank you for being on the show, for joining us, sharing your thoughts on your service to Fairfax County. The position of County Executive for Fairfax County is a big job, the most important in the county, and I want to thank Tony for everything he has done for our citizens. I wish him Godspeed as he goes on to pursue other goals and aspirations. As the Board of Supervisors prepares to begin the process of selecting a new county executive, I want to invite county residents to call my office at 703-425-9300 or email me at braddock@fairfaxcounty.gov to share your thoughts and suggestions on what we should be looking for in our new county executive. I hope you've enjoyed this segment of Braddock Neighborhood News. Thank you for watching. Tune in next month for another edition, and please remember to look for ways to volunteer. Your community needs you.